Hi, welcome back. I'm Blaise Hope at the World Economic Forum for Berita Satu with John Riady, Executive Director of the Lippo Group and co-chair of the forum. We touched on the role of Indonesia in the world. Can we expand on that a little bit? It's been brought up recently that it could be a mediator in several conflicts. Do you see that as viable a tool to growing its global presence, its global recognition?
I think so. I mean, Indonesia has always played a very pivotal role in global politics. I mentioned the case of the Asian African Conference. I also made reference to Indonesia's role in the establishment of ASEAN. So I think going forward, given Indonesia's economic size, given Indonesia's large population, we will become a representative and an important voice in the global order. And we see that over the last 5 years, we're now a member of the G20. People talk about Indonesia over the next 20 years becoming a top 8 country. So yes, I think Indonesia's voice will continue to grow in this world.
Well, speaking of influential countries, especially in the region, China, its economic slowdown has been in the business press for the past couple of years, and it's part of a topic of discussion here. What's your view?
I think the Chinese economy is going through a rebalancing. So essentially, they're having to rebalance away from an export investment-led economy to one that's consumption-driven. That'll inevitably mean lower growth rates. So essentially what China must do is while it is decreasing the size of its exports and investment, it must grow another part of its economy, consumption. How can it do it fast enough that it doesn't cause too much dislocation? Now, there's a lot of question about whether China can do that. I think we're not giving China enough credit for the reforms that they're taking. Since the new administration in China took office, and especially since 2013, China has passed a series of very aggressive and deep reform packages that I think will have huge implications, positive ones, on China in boosting internal demand, but also allowing China to continue to evolve towards a free market economy. The reforms are basically 4 buckets. The first is in financial and capital account deregulation, which essentially means it's the deregulation of interest rates, but also the RMB moving towards full convertibility. So that's the first bucket. The second bucket is with regard to SOE reform. So China is reforming its state-owned enterprises and empowering its private sector. So the Chinese private sector makes up 2/3 of the economy, but only gets 1/5 of credit. So essentially, its private sector is starved. So China understands that, they want to rebalance that. There's also the third bucket, which is land and social reform, essentially increasing the welfare of farmers, increasing productivity, and also increasing urbanization. And the last is China's foreign economic policy. We saw that in the news 3 days ago, China launched a package with Pakistan, $40 billion, I believe the number was. This is an example of China's efforts to engage the region. And what they're essentially doing is they want to create what they call a One Belt, One Road policy, OBOR, where this would, in effect, reallocate industries in China that have overcapacity to other countries. At the same time, it also creates demand for Chinese goods from other countries. It also diversifies the FX reserves and also helps to internationalize the RMB. So these are all, I think, wonderful structural reforms that the Chinese government's taking. It's not going to be easy, but I think it's manageable.
Do you think Indonesian policymakers can take some cues from some of that, less reliance, better structural reform, and since that they can't export as much, more focus on the non-resources sector?
I think so. But keep in mind that the Chinese economy is functioning in a different political system. They can do things that Indonesia may not, because we are a democracy. So this context is very different. Also, China is at 10,000 GDP per capita. Indonesia is at 3,500. So while China has entered sort of middle income, we haven't quite done that yet. So I think the policies will be different, but you're right. I think in terms of the mindset and taking bold reforms, I think we can embrace what they're doing.
Circling back to Indonesia just for our final few minutes, employment, we've got a massive young population that's coming up. What can they address to make sure these people are in work and not underemployed or not without jobs?
Yeah, half the Indonesian population is under 29 years old. That's a huge asset, but also can be a huge curse, depending on how we manage that. One of the biggest issues, as you point out, is unemployment. This will continue to be a bigger and bigger issue, especially as the Indonesian economy continues to evolve, especially with the advent of the technological revolution that I think is sweeping through the country. So I think unless Indonesia continues to reform its educational system, unless Indonesia continues to educate a workforce that is competitive regionally and is able to be productive, we're going to be in big trouble. But I think there's reason to be optimistic. In this administration, the government decided to split the education minister portfolio, one focusing on higher ed, the other focusing on K-12. I think that's a good move because education is a big agenda. So we've got more hands and a bigger sort of dedication to it.
So do you see education as basically the defining factor?
I think so. I think over the long run, the future of any country will depend a lot about education, and Indonesia is no different. So yes, education is very critical for the future of Indonesia.
One of the remarkable things about Indonesia, of course, is the social media use. With people who aren't able to get cable, getting things like smartphones and more people joining and getting involved, how can that be exploited to increase Indonesia's perhaps business position abroad or cultural influence?
That's a good question. Indonesia is very active online. We're the second largest market for Facebook outside of the US. We're dubbed the Twitter capital of the world. Indonesia is the only market, aside from India, where there were more Google searches from mobile phones as opposed to desktop or laptop computers. So it's a very vibrant digital market. How it can help businesses to develop, I think the advent of the mobile phones and the internet will do a lot to facilitate access, whether that's access to health, access to information, access to the financial system, across everything. I think the digital world has the ability to empower people and to democratize power.
And education, can we get that through a smartphone?
Absolutely.
John, is there anything you'd like to add about this forum and what you've taken away from everyone who's come here?
Yeah, well, I think we've talked a lot about a lot of things, but I think we were extremely impressed with President Joko's remarks yesterday. He spoke after the prime ministers of Cambodia and Vietnam and some of the other ones. I think there was a stark contrast in his approach, in his friendliness, in his down-to-earth demeanor. And for many people, this is the first time that they heard our president speak. I think it's the right approach, and people have high expectations, so all eyes are on Indonesia. So we must prove ourselves.
Would you say there was a degree of a show of humility?
Absolutely. I think there's this is not an easy time for the president. As we know, domestically, he's facing a lot of challenges. So I think he's been very humble in addressing the real challenges, but also trying to work and achieve real results.
John, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Join us next time. I'm Blaise Hope at the World Economic Forum on East Asia in Jakarta.